Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about one of our region's most precious assets, our lake. I'm pretty sure you understand and recognize just how great our lake is because you own property on the shore. And I agree with you, it's a wonderful, one-of-a-kind feature, one that supports recreation, commerce, industry, and our overall environment. That's why one of the county's main strategic initiatives is our Lakefront Public Access Plan. My vision is a walking and biking path all along the lake, from one end of the lake to the other. In fact, I'd like to see it from one end of the state to the other. That'll transform our entire region. How can we do that? We need to make sure that our lake is healthy. We need to make sure that our shorelines are safe from the destructive forces of erosion. And where possible, we need to expand access to the lake. Now, I know that talk of access, particularly when you're a private property owner, can be a little alarming, but let me assure you, we're not planning to take anyone's private property. What we do want to do is engage in discussions and to give you a terrific example of where we have seen a large project along the lakeshore work to great advantage both for property owners and for the public. In exchange for your voluntary agreement to allow this path to go forward, the county would take on the responsibility of helping to stop erosion along the shores. This should be a huge win for property owners. We can make your shoreline safer and we can help increase your property values for years to come. So I hope we can begin this conversation about the Lakefront Public Access Plan and how it relates to you. I know that the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission is working to gather your input, and I look forward to hearing the feedback from this meeting and others. Our lake, it's so amazing and so unique. Let's work together to keep it that way and to make it even better for all of us. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Michael Dever. I'm the Director of Public Works for Cuyahoga County. And on behalf of County Executive Armin Budish, I welcome you to today's discussion and looking forward to getting your feedback and thoughts on this important initiative that is a priority for Cuyahoga County. So with that, Jason.
We're going to go through some housekeeping, which Jake started talking about just in terms of how you ask questions and those types of things. We'll talk about the project background for those who haven't maybe participated yet. We'll give you an overview of the plan itself and the recommendations. We'll talk about what this could look like and some of the prototypical shoreline treatments. I think we've heard a lot of folks asking questions about what will it look like? What's it going to look like in my backyard, potentially? All those types of questions are things we'll talk through. Then we've got an opportunity that we'd like to take to walk you through on how what type of feedback we'd like in terms of jump starting a new process that NOACA is moving forward. And so we'll talk about that with a survey that should take you 10 or 15 minutes.
Thank you, Jason. I'm Jim Sonhalter. I'm with County Planning and the project manager for this project. I'd like to talk to you briefly about the planning context for our Lakefront Public Access Plan. Again, the key words being public access. We are focused on the shoreline with this project and the lakefront properties, both privately and publicly owned. And our general project area encompasses the shoreline and southward to Lakeshore Boulevard on the east side and Lake Road on the west side. Again, our primary focus here is on public access, but we're also looking at stabilizing the shoreline by controlling erosion and opportunities where we can do that, promoting ecology and the health of the lake and healthy habitat for plants and animals, and also looking at opportunities for green infrastructure for stormwater management so we can enhance the water quality, improve the water quality before it goes into the lake. And a big part of this is a focus on multimodal transportation, especially active transportation. How can we improve connections so you can better walk or bike to lakefront parks? You'll see from this map, there are a number of different projects going on, both local and regional in scope. We've got the Community Confluence. It's a NOACA-funded Transportation for Livable Communities initiative between Lakewood, Rocky River, and the Metro Parks. Also, Metro Parks is doing the CHEERS project, the Cleveland Harbor Eastern Embayment Resilience Study, focusing in the area around East 55th. Vision for the Valley in Cleveland is looking at the Cuyahoga River along going upstream and then its mouth in Lake Erie, and also a downtown connectivity study that's also a TLCI project. And next slide, please. And here we can look at some projects in greater detail. In Bay Village, we're looking at the village, or the city is improving Cahoon Park, where Cahoon Creek empties into the lake. Rocky River is also working on Bradstreet's Landing, another lakefront park and public access opportunity. Lakewood has completed its Solstice Steps project. And again, here you see Cheers, very large project area. But you can see it stretches from Dike 14 to the east, all the way to the eastern end of Burke Lakefront Airport. So the East 55th Street Marina and other amenities in between. You'll see Vision for the Valley and the Euclid Waterfront improvement plan. And you're going to hear from Kelly Britt from NOACA later on in this presentation to talk about the regional lakefront plan. So next slide, please. Jason, if you'd want to talk about the Euclid Waterfront improvement plan.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. So the Lakefront Public Access Plan in Euclid has been talked about as being a model for what private partnerships could look like that could protect the shoreline, but at the same time integrate public access. And it's a little bit different on the west side of the county versus the east side, just from a geology standpoint. But the idea of partnering is the same, and finding a way to make it work for both parties. And so that project is just moving forward and actually nearly complete with the easternmost phase of the shore protection, which opens up that 3/4 of a mile of lakefront public access. And that's a pretty exciting opportunity. And it's already being well used, even though it's in the middle of construction. So we'll talk a little bit about that project, but try and show you a little bit more about how that specifically could apply to different geographies. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the project itself, or on our process, just in case you haven't been engaged throughout the entire process. We're actually at the end of the beginning of a discussion, I guess, is sort of where we're at for this, is that we're really at here. It's kind of in a 6-month process that ultimately leads to something that takes 14 months and then ultimately probably takes another couple year or so to get built. So we're at the beginning of that process, but we need to create a roadmap. And that's really what we're looking to do with this particular project, is identify where those opportunities for potential public-private partnerships exist that can create expanded public access along lakefront. So we'll talk about sort of the 3 main steps, and we'll focus mostly on this 3rd step, which is the recommendations, because that's new information for everybody. Before we kind of begin, though, I do want to get a little bit of information from you guys about who's on the call. It's always helpful to understand just contextually who participants are, where they fit into this. So there's 2 ways you can join this poll. It's pretty easy to do. I recommend the right side here, joining by text, frankly, because it's easiest from my perspective. You can do the web application, which is the left one, if you like, but it would have real good functionality for you on the right side by joining via text. So you can just text SG Chicago to 22333, and that should get you into the poll. So I'll hang here on this slide for just a moment while we let people kind of do that. All right, so I'm going to flip one slide forward, and it's pretty simple. A, B, or C. You're selecting that type of thing. So first question is, have you participated in any of the meetings before that we've had about the Lakefront Public Access Plan? And this will hopefully update. This is always a little tenuous, so we'll see if it hopefully updates. We've got looks like a lot of new people participating. See how that really plays out here. So A is for yes, B is for no. So we're getting close to a 50-50 split. So for some people, this will be new information, which is fine. I think it'll just be a lot of catch up, which is fine. And we can direct you also to the Cuyahoga County Planning website, which will give you a lot more information just in terms of background. So we'll move forward onto the next one. I'll ask you another quick question. Where do you live? Just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Where do you live in those communities? Just helps us understand what where our group is from. Okay, heavy in the center part of the county here. A little bit in Euclid. Not much on the far west side. Okay. All right, thanks. I think I have one more for you. And for those who have participated, which it looks like it's probably 47% of you, have you responded previously to any of the surveys? Okay. So we've got a number of folks, even though it's that have been engaged and have responded, then it's probably looking like it's sort of that 50-50 blend. Okay, that's good to sort of understand where we're at there. So for those who have been involved in this process, you've seen this slide before, and basically we've had a series of discussions, and we've had a variety of different partners and players in this discussion. And part of it is really this big blue arrow is really one of our emphasis areas, and in terms of groups we've been speaking with. When you talk about expanding lakefront public access in a county that's primarily privately owned, lakefront property owners have to be engaged. And so that's really an important discussion for us. And so engaging them and understanding that all the recommendations need to sort of run back through that group, because ultimately we have to partner with them, and that's the goal. We're trying to develop partnerships with those private owners. But we did actually start with a series of stakeholder organizations and discussions with development corporations, special interest groups, state, federal agencies, those types of things. And we talked a lot with the leaders and elected officials within the various counties. And on top of that, we had a pretty diverse steering committee, and that steering committee and the stakeholders and the county residents and everybody who's participated has continued to feed this discussion and keep giving us guidance on what some of the recommendations are that you'll see tonight. So in our first meeting, we actually asked a series we actually had a survey. And so we actually had a public survey, and then we had 2 separate landowner meetings. So I just took and distilled some of the top things that we heard from people in each of those surveys. And from the lakefront landowners, we heard that a lot of folks are potentially interested in partnering to create public access for shore protection, and that the reason that's probably so high is because there's actually a potential loss of existing structures, not just loss of land, but actually some built improvement. And you can see by the numbers, which I kind of just ticked off, they change daily, sort of like we've received a few letters of intent which specifically talk about a willingness to potentially partner, and then a bunch of other discussions that we've had with other groups who've just reached out to learn more about the opportunity. And then we had some really good public feedback about what types of uses people prefer, what parks they'd like to see better connected, how I guess the importance of better connections being a critical component of expanding public lakefront access to them, and we'll talk more about that tonight. We had a pretty high participation level in both those meetings, a little bit higher than what we have tonight. I think we have about 70 tonight or so. And you can kind of see, this is one example of what we started with at the beginning, not just only talking with landowners and residents and the steering committee and stakeholder members, but we started trying to actually inventory and understand the existing conditions. So one of the things that we had an opportunity to do was tour the entire lakefront, identify where there's significant erosion, identify what might be impacted by that significant erosion, and start to rate the segments of the shoreline based upon that. And so this is on the east side, over East 156th. You can see in the lower right images, there's some substantial erosion through that zone. And this yellow line that shows up is sort of this indication of what we're talking about, a lakefront trail down at the bottom of the bluff. And the bluff here really isn't that high. It's probably 20, 25 feet, something along those lines. Now, if I go over to the west side, it's dramatically different, right? and we've heard a lot about this from the residents and participants in the meetings thus far, is that, this is a 60, 80-foot bluff, right? And that is dramatically different than what we just looked at. And so those conditions are primarily shale. Well, we did look at the shale itself, and there are actually some pitting and some holes in it, and that actually isn't exactly the safest situation. There's been shore protection that's been added. Some of it's in good condition, some of it's in really poor condition. But what it adds up to is that, well, it's still stone, it's still not stable. And so we talk with landowners about loss of structures at the top of the bluff, and they're experiencing those types of things. And so when we talk about lakefront public access there, what could that mean? It could be a trail down more towards the water, which is a totally different experience in somebody's backyard, high-fiving while you're eating dinner. That's a very different experience. And so I want to make sure that we understand when we talk about that. And we'll show some more slides that talk about that too. But at the beginning of this process, understanding the conditions was really important. What also became really important is understanding how we can start to connect things better together. And so we started to explore some of these opportunities, and we started this section primarily with a survey to lakefront landowners. And there were I think there were 3,800 landowners we sent out surveys to, something along those lines, and we got back a number of them. And what was really interesting and telling to us is that outside of downtown Cleveland, there's about 2.7 miles of public shoreline. That's it. And 8 lakefront parks. That puts about 18.5 miles of shoreline in that same zone in a private realm. And that tells you a little bit about the limitations in terms of where public access can occur, and that's really the goal here, is can we find opportunities where it's collaborative between public and private landowners. And so what we did was we took the 30 some odd miles of the lakefront, and we actually broke it up into different incremental segments. And we had to do that in order to understand local geology, existing features, ownership, all those various factors start to influence and inform how we broke up these different segments, so we could start rating them to understand where's it ideally the best place to invest or potentially explore a public-private partnership. And so we'll go through some of the methodology on that. The first place we sort of started with this was actually to start looking at key criteria. And so talking with landowners, the public, our steering committee, and stakeholders, they give us a series of criteria that start to inform how we rate and evaluate each of those lakefront segments of shoreline. And so whether it's talking about equitable access from an economic or race perspective, that's one particular factor, whether it's talking about protecting or preserving something that's actually built, like a road or a home or a boathouse or a pool or anything like that, protecting and enhancing habitat. And then all these various criteria were really put into the mix when we started rating and evaluating shoreline segments. The human spirit piece of this is always a funny one, but I talk about it in a probably a guy way. Standing at the end of a pier watching a sunset. I don't know what it is exactly, but it warms your heart, right? So it's those moments that was about creating unique natural assets, unique experiences, all those things. So there's all these series of criteria, and there's these sections of shoreline, and we mush those two together, and we evaluate each of those segments against how does it compare and how does it relate to the various criteria. And that creates sort of a prioritization, a high, medium, and low priority areas. And the priority in this case is how important is it from a community perspective and from a county perspective to consider investing in a particular segment of shoreline. So we're talking about those areas that are high priority, are areas where we're really interested in looking at or exploring a potential partnership with those residents. If the lakefront residents in that particular stretch of shoreline aren't interested, then we move on to the next highly rated segment. And that's sort of the strategy that comes out of the Lakefront Public Access Plan. This is not about a taking. This isn't about any of those types of things. It's about, can we partner? And so we wanted to have a way of looking at the various segments and understanding where we should look first to partner potentially. Well, there's criteria that we talked about, equitable access and habitat and all those good things. That doesn't really matter unless there's a private piece to this, unless there's willingness by the private landowners to actually participate. And so where do those two intersect and overlap? And that's really the area we're trying to get to, is creating focus areas, identifying where there is actually interest. And we have, I guess, as I sort of showed earlier on the earlier slides, there was a good example of we've had 9 thus far letters of interest, which basically are non-binding letters that are transmitted to the county that say, yeah, we're interested in exploring this further. Let's talk about more detail. And that's what we're really trying to get to, are these focus areas where there's a high priority and interest, and then where is there a private interest, and coming together on that. And so I'm going to ask you just to describe, to click on what describes you best. Are you a lakefront property owner? Are you not somebody who lives along lakefront? Are you somebody outside of the county? Where do you fit on this spectrum? So you got a heavy population and participation from lakefront property owners. That's wonderful. And I think what's important about that is you're obviously directly influencing this process. At the same time, for those of you who aren't lakefront property owners, and even those of you who are, we're going to talk about an opportunity to talk about and enhance and inform how we make connections to the lake, and we'll go over that in a short bit. So remember, we talked about the segment ratings, these 41 different segments of the lakefront. How do they rate? Are they high? Is there a high level of interest? Do they compare well against, or score well on the criteria? Is there a pretty high medium level of interest? Well, as we talked about, there's this other filter, the landowner, right? And are they interested? And so if you're interested, and you're interested in becoming a focus area, if you will, something that gets further studied, that answers detailed questions about what will this look like in my backyard, how late will it be open, what will it, what kind of lighting will be there, those are all things that you get to talk through, but I can't answer those until we sort of start to understand where there might be public-private partnership and interest. So the first step in that is usually a letter of interest, and it's a pretty straightforward thing. Basically, you go to the county's website, and I'll give you all a link shortly, and it just says, are you interested in exploring? It's non-binding. It just says, yeah, we're interested in exploring. If you're in a higher medium area, we really encourage you to give us that feedback. The next step after that, and there are really 2, is memorandums of understanding, and those start to get into hours of operation and a lot more specificity about the design and all those bits and pieces, but still isn't exactly binding. The third step, which is really specific easements and agreements, and those are a lot more complex, but the premise behind it is that we're taking, each is an incremental step towards giving you the information that you want, and creating something that can actually be built and real. And so by the time you get to that third step, we probably had, I don't know, 10, 15 meetings and probably talked about a lot of details. So that first step, though, in this process, if you're an interested landowner, is submitting a letter of interest. And so I'm going to go through, for now, just the recommendations, and it's going to be quick. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, because we're actually going to be posting on the county's website a web application where you can go and look up, here's where I am, what's my segment of lakefront rated? And just because you see a color across it doesn't mean that anything's happening. It means there's an interest, and let's see if you want to talk and you want to submit a letter of interest, then we'll talk. But if there's no interest from the lakefront landowners in that region, then there's no project. So first things first, understand how to read the diagrams. So there's, as we talked about, focus areas are where we've actually got a letter of interest from the landowners. High and medium are just those areas where we're getting a lot of interest from property owners, or sorry, getting a lot of interest from a criteria standpoint. They're comparing well against our criteria. And then there's sort of the areas where it doesn't align as well with those criteria that we established. So you can see those sort of over here. This is a east side example, and we'll go through these west to east in a minute. Beyond just these segments and the ratings that you saw along the lakefront, right? These 3 different colors, this medium color, this east 5 is a high level of interest in this focus area, and 6 and 7, we're showing the existing network. And so the existing network of public bike paths and trails, all those kind of things are shown in this gray line. You'll see that in the diagrams. And then there's some other recommendations that we're including here. And these are recommendations that I really want you guys to pay attention to, because those are part of our survey that we're looking to get specific information on. Well, I can't have individual members of the public comment on somebody's backyard because that's not exactly fair. I can talk about with the public, how do you get to the lakefront? And that's really important. So the things that you see in this sort of, I'm gonna call it magenta color, those are sections of shoreline or sections of improvements that tie potential lakefront access back into the network of bike and pedestrian trails that exist already. And they're not set, but those are areas where we could potentially look to invest in. What we're trying to make sure we understand is what would be most beneficial from your perspective. So let's go west to east with the recommendations, okay? So this is starting out in Bay Village, and we're going to kind of go by municipality because it's geographically focused, and so it makes some sense. On the west side, we're starting at the county line. You can see in the center of this, you can see Cahoon Park and you can see Huntington Reservation. Those two areas you can see pretty well. Those are in green. To the west of there, West 3, is actually a medium or pretty highly rated area. East of that, connecting from basically Cahoon Park over to Columbia Park, could be an area where there's a fair bit of interest. Not necessarily interest from lakefront landowners. That's the discussion we need to have. And the recommendation is we need to talk more about whether or not there's a public-private partnership that makes sense there. Continuing further east from there, over to the end of Clegg Road. Clegg Road is an area where there's some investment. That's a pretty highly rated segment as well. And so again, remember that we talked earlier, and I'll keep reiterating this, these magenta color are potential improvements that could enhance connections from the lakefront improvements out into the community. So we'll talk more about that in the survey, and Jake will go over that in a little bit. So that's sort of Bay Village. As we go a little bit east into Rocky River, there's an interesting connecting from Clegg Road over to Bradstreet's Landing. That's a fairly highly rated segment. There's some complicating factors like a stream, a bunch of condo associations, all those types of improvements. Again, it needs to be filtered through this lens of is there interest from the private landowners. There's another improvement here that is Elmwood Trail connection. That's actually connecting from Elmwood Park up to Bradstreet's Landing. In working with the city, there's been a lot of interest in making that connection because we understand that Lake Road right now is not exactly the most interesting for those with small kids. And so can we create a different connection that maybe ties a large segment of the population into the lakefront? And so that's an area of interest as well. There's other improvements that the county is advancing right now with the Lake Clifton Bridge, and then there's some obvious improvements off of Lake Avenue and Clifton Boulevard to the east in Lakewood. So this is an area where you're seeing in Lakewood and the west side of Cleveland a fair bit of interest, and this really is driven by an interest to connect between Edgewater Park and Lakewood Park. And so you can see there's these orange areas are where there's a high level of interest. This section I'm showing right here by Cove Avenue and Edgewood Drive, that's an area that is highly rated in terms of having potential interest in looking at public-private partnerships. That's known as the Gold Coast area. To the west of that, out to Lakewood Park, obviously there's some interest, and then perhaps even a little bit further west to Summit Avenue, there might be some potential interest as well. There's this segment that goes east from the Gold Coast over to Edgewater was highly rated as well. It's a pretty complicated stretch of shoreline and a lot of different landowners. And like the rest of these, we would need to find partnerships where people are actually interested in talking about public-private partnership to expand public access and yet provide shore protection. Another interesting point here is just the connection of 117th and that corridor being really important with the RTA stop down to the south. Moving downtown, there's a lot of momentum, and there's not a lot, I think, that we're trying to say that is different than what's already being done, because there's been a tremendous amount of effort and lift by Metro Parks and other organizations to get things built down here. And I think that the Windy Park Bridge opening and the Whiskey Island Trail connection. Those are really great opportunities. There's the land bridge that's down by Voinovich Park. All those are wonderful opportunities, and it's a pretty bikeable network, and the lakefront itself is relatively accessible, kind of with the exception of the east bank of the mouth of the river. But there's a lot of opportunity to actually access the lakefront there. But if we go a little bit further to the east, I think one of the areas where I know that there's been a lot of interest in extending from 9th to 55th, and that will eventually connect to the Cheers project, right? That's a really important corridor. And so how important, and when we're talking about this upcoming survey we'd like you to fill out, is talk to us a little bit about that. We at the county has taken some initiative and talked with partners to advance that project, and we want to make sure that we're investing in the right improvement there. Going a little bit further east, this is the Bracknell area, and you can see what's happening here is this section of shoreline. A lot of that section of shoreline actually doesn't rate particularly well against the criteria. Most of it's already protected. There's not a whole lot of erosion that's occurring because people have spent the resources. But what is important is this connection into the lakefront bike network that comes through Bracknell. And that's by Eddy Road. And is there an improvement down Eddy Road that actually enhances connection to the Glenville neighborhood? And that could be a really powerful connection, just enhancing that bridge connection, improving it for bikes and pedestrians. So that's an important section we'd like you guys to comment on the public side. As we move further to the east, I think this is an area where you're seeing a lot of different things go on. So this is the easterly power plant. Treatment plant through that area, and then the lakefront reservation at Euclid Creek with Euclid Beach, Villa Angela, and then Wildwood. And so you can see there's a fair bit of interest in that. Could there be a trail developed in conjunction with the treatment plant? Could we work with Northeast Ohio Regional to make that happen? There are some areas where there's a lot of interest, and actually 2 segments of shoreline where we've actually received a number of letters of interest, and that's creating a focus area where we're currently investigating and looking at whether or not we can move that forward. We've actually got some really good positive news about that, and we're actually having a lot of momentum there. Further to the east from Wildwood area, there's a high degree of interest, and that extends all the way to East 185th, and I'll show you that on the next slide. That extends up to basically 194th there. As we come into Euclid, you see kind of by the downtown, Sims Park is obviously a corridor that, if you're familiar with lakefront development and the improvements in Euclid, you'll see that there's potential interest in connecting Euclid Park and Sims Park together. And that's really what's being shown in these 2 colors here in this area. And then further to the east, basically the extension, eastward extension of the Euclid Waterfront Improvement Plan, extending all the way over to I think that is Lloyd Road there, and that's just really close to the county limits. There's a variety of other connections that tie north and south. 222nd or 250th. Those are both corridors that are really potentially important. Want to understand from you if those are the corridors that make sense in your mind. So while we just went through each of these lakefront segments, and I went through them really fast, particularly if you're a landowner and you're looking at it in more detail, we're gonna, like I said, have that posted on the website so that you can actually look it up and you can actually see where your interest, what your segment of shoreline is rated, and then you can see if there's an opportunity or if there's interest between you and the county to partner. Looking at it geographically is interesting, but what does it really mean? And so remember this, at the beginning of this, we talked about 2.7 miles of shoreline. And what we're looking at in these top 3 categories or so, the focus area, high and medium categories, those are about 25 new segments of shoreline for about 10 miles. That puts over half of those areas outside of downtown in an area where there might be some interest in a public-private partnership, assuming that the lakefront landowners actually are interested as well. And that gets us back to the slide that we talked about earlier. If you're interested, submit a letter of interest. we'll continue to talk, get in more detail. If you're not, that's okay too. You can send a letter that says you're not interested. That'd be great. So I'm going to talk about two specific areas. And this is, I kind of talked about this as am I in or am I out? This is sort of a discussion of understanding what a private landowner might think. So this is an area here where we don't know if there's interest. And so this is down here by just east of the treatment plant. So you can see what you're seeing here is medium rated and a highly rated segment. This line that goes back to Lakeshore Boulevard, that line is just because I need to tie it back to an existing bike and ped network. Does it have to occur there? Nope. That's all part of the discussion with the lakefront landowners and the residents who live along those corridors. So if people were to say, I don't want that coming down my street, are there other options? Yeah, maybe we could look at partnering with the landowner to the left, the church to the left, and look at a connection there, or we could maybe work with this landowner who's probably going to hate me forever. It's their side yard, and we could come through their side yard. This one probably is highly suspect. This one maybe is more reasonable, but I can't tell you where those connections ultimately need to be until we actually have discussion with the individual residents, because I just don't know. How many do we have? 10 in a row? Do we have 50 in a row? What do we have? So this is another example of a little bit different area, and I'm going to just focus on this area because there's been already a public-private partnership that's being talked about in this stretch, and this is over by Beulah Park, and this is over here by Euclid Beach, and so this is East 6 and East 7, and you can see in the lower right-hand area why there's interest, and these are the same photos. And the resident who took this shows that from 2014 to 2021, in that 7-year span, they've lost, I don't know, 30 feet in some areas, and that's pretty severe. And the problem is that land, they don't own that land in front of their homes. It's actually owned by Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. Well, through this process, a letter of interest came in from a variety of different landowners, and we've actually got an opportunity here to affect change and in an immediate sense to make something that could actually protect those homes and create an opportunity for expanding public access in this stretch. And so this area that I just highlighted, this white area, we have actually letters of interest from all those landowners, even associations that say, yeah, we're interested in exploring it. We're not committing to it, but we know that there's potential partnership and we want to talk more about what this could look like. How could this be managed? What could it feel like? What are the connections? So this green line went outside of that area where I've had an opportunity to talk with these landowners. So maybe they don't like that idea. Maybe they say that's a horrible idea. So there's some other connections or potential opportunities. One could come through this association who's suggested they may be willing. We haven't talked to them about making this connection. Maybe that's something they're not interested in. Maybe this is the only connection we can have here. These are detailed discussions that we can't have in a public format. It's a one-on-one association discussion because it's really hard to have that discussion and understand specific concerns. But this letter of intent that we have for this particular area allows us to have those more detailed discussions. That allows us to spend dollars on doing geotechnical investigations, doing surveys, all those things that create momentum and are potentially what leads to a project. So that area, and I'll turn this back over to Mike just to talk about, is the Beulah Park. We're calling it the Beulah Park Euclid Beach focus area. And that basically connects over from Beulah Park around East 156th over to Euclid Beach, and that's the segment. And so we've created some diagrams that we're using for grant purposes and some examples of what this could potentially look like. So, Mike, did you have thoughts on a couple of these things you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, actually, I think we'll jump to Jim first, and then I'll follow up right after him.
Sounds great.
All right, sounds great. And yes, lots and lots of very positive momentum for this project. As Jason was saying, we're looking at this opportunity to extend an all-purpose trail from the Euclid Beach area, the Lakefront Reservation, all the way up to east of 156th, and then continue it westward to wrap around the Regional Sewer District outfall property to the west here. And at the same time, incorporating shoreline protection into this all-purpose trail and protecting the residential properties in the Beulah Park neighborhood. We've been, in developing this project, we've come up with an initial cost estimate of $5.8 million, more or less. And to fund it, we've been really busy. We've submitted 5 grant applications already. A lot of them coming from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, $500,000 from the Clean Ohio Trails Fund, another $150,000 from the Recreational Trails Program. We've applied for $150,000 from Nature Works, and just over $1 million from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Happy to report that our application to the Erosion Emergency Assistance Grant has been granted. We've been awarded $1 million to start the construction for this project. So we're really excited about that. And, we're anticipating hearing some, good positive news from ODNR in the coming months to continue stacking dollars to fully fund this project. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Right. So, Jim, those are great points, and it's good to hear that we've been fortunate to be able to receive that grant. So that's what we're doing here, is we're looking at where are there opportunities to get dollars to assist us in this effort. And as a government agency, we have more, the opportunities are greater for the government to be able to secure these opportunities as opposed to a private property owner. We have, at this time, as many of you know, there's significant Washington at the federal level, and the county has been very busy and working with our local congressional representatives to try and advance some dollars to come back into our neighborhoods here, so that we can invest in these areas. And we've been fortunate to advance a recommendation through Representative Marcy Kaptur, and then also through Senator Sherrod Brown. So these opportunities don't come too often, and we are trying to make sure that we are following what's happening in Washington so that we can try and capture these dollars that have come available that I don't think are going to be available again in the near future. So the opportunities are here right now, and we're trying to position ourselves to go after those dollars.
That's a great point, and I think the county's done an excellent job of getting themselves positioned and working with their legislators to get those things allocated. And so even recently, Senator Brown placed 2 requests in for projects that are supported and integrated into the Lakefront Public Access Plan. So that's the project over in Bay Village along the lakefront, and then East 185th. Those are both funding opportunities that continue to help either advance looking at the plan in totality, or specific projects that are implemented or able to be implemented as part of this plan. So one of the questions that we get all the time is, what will it look like? And so these are just the sort of the questions that we had from the last group, and I'm sure there's some other questions tonight. I'll start with the questions that aren't highlighted. So is paddlecraft access being considered integrated? Yes, for sure. Looking at where the Blue Water Trail for lake areas is an important piece of this. How will lakefront trails be managed? What about safety? We'll talk a little bit about that, but in general, what we've seen is those are managed by the local municipality, or in this case, potentially the county or its partners, maybe Metro Parks, perhaps. It depends on that, but those are things that are detailed in the easements and agreements that are worked out with landowners. Who's responsible for doing what? Again, those are details that are worked out specifically in detailed agreements. They're I dot and T crossing sort of agreements, that type of stuff. So let's focus though on sort of the boundary box that we've put on this slide, which is west and east are different. Yep, totally get it. And what will it look like, and how do we balance public and private partnerships and access? And so let's talk a little bit about those things. So this is probably new for some of you, but these are 3 or 4 different ideas of how you can stabilize a shoreline. So well you look at stone shoreline or a shale bluff, and you say it's relatively stable, it requires additional geotechnical investigation to determine that. And we know that there's some areas that are unstable, and in a majority of the areas, this is not an option. This one in the center is actually pulling back the top of the bluff, and this was actually only allowed in Euclid in a couple of areas. On the west side, I don't see a lot of it, particularly in an example like the Gold Coast. There's improvements right there. I can't pull the top of the bluff back. That doesn't work. So that's off the table in a lot of instances. These other examples on the right-hand side or left-hand side are a little bit different. And I'll talk about some of the details associated with it, knowing that we'd have to do a lot more study, but conceptually, there are sections, if you're going to develop a trail at the bottom of the bluff, there are sections of that bluff material that will fall. We have to remove that. Falling rocks, people don't really work too well. So we first want to set the trail off a little bit, and then we want to make sure that we have removed that material. And then there's also another sort of belt and suspenders approach, which is a mesh that goes over the top, and then there's a material that can be placed over that mesh to help completely or mitigate that to a much greater extent. In some areas, you could just do a different approach, which is maybe the bluff itself is perfectly stable, and what's really happening is the toe itself, which is that land and water interface, is where we're actually having the erosion. And so if I can protect it from ice shove, big chunks of ice, for example, or waves constantly wetting it so that it doesn't, spall and erode, you can do that in a couple different ways. That's what this right image could be, and I could actually offset it and create sort of a parallel breakwater, or I could do something that's like what I'm showing in the lower left image here. In all these various instances, though, you could have a beach, you could have a marina, you could have a million different things, whatever you kind of think of. If it's just, we need to think about shore protection, not just as stones. You can be useful things that are attractive too. What could it look like? Well, these are just some examples that we started to create that tell you a little bit more about what this aesthetically could look like. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. The only thing I'll highlight here is that beyond the toe protection, one of the things that you often have is there's seeps out of the face of these bluffs, and so wick drains, sometimes drilled horizontally into the face of the bluff, are necessary to help manage that water. But the idea with this one is just essentially a stone revetment, a walkway. In some areas, we know there's actually unpermitted fill. We can actually work with that unpermitted fill and actually enhance it and make it part of our coastal structures and become something that's an amenity, and yet also deal with the permitting issues that exist. Instead of stone, you could use steel sheet pile. Great. Or we could, like I said, just offset it. In some areas that might make sense. And we can always add a beach. So that's dramatically different than the west side. The Euclid example, people look at it and say, well, I don't understand. That's not what we're dealing with. And you're right. That is very different. So these represent more what you're seeing in Euclid. These are actually prototypes that probably almost all exist in Euclid. And there's some instances where we have a small retaining wall on the upside of the slope so that we can keep the top of the bluff exactly where it is today, because people don't want to lose their shoreline any more than they have to, of course, whether that's from us or whether that's from the lake. Both will, the lake certainly will have its day without some investment. So there's, steel sheet pile, there's stone. Again, you can add a beach if you want. So could look something like this. They look similar to the last one. There's a lot less of a bluff, much more of a landscape character rather versus stone on the upside of the trail. Sheet pile, of course, always an option. When you have a fall greater than 30 inches, you have to put a guardrail. So you need that in this instance. You can always add a beach, and maybe you could add some stairs that connect the two, right? That can be nice. So those are kind of what it could look like. Not on your specific property, because I can't tell you, because that's too many conditions when you have 4,000 parcels along the entire lakefront. But I can say that it's an idea and how we could address it. And so the other question is, how do you balance public-private partnership or public access? And this is one example. And this association all signed on to this. They have a platform that has a gate and a keypad and a lock that they can get down into, and they were really concerned about that and trespassing. And so we worked with them to create that, but yet there's an access down to the beach that's allowed for anyone. So there's the public who can move along the lakefront, but they can't come up the street. And there's actually a gate at the top and there's a gate at the bottom. This image is a little old before that. So question, we had, what was it, 63, something like that, 63%? I don't remember, it was 40 to 60% of the people on the call here are shoreline property owner. Are you potentially interested in a public-private partnership? And again, this is not saying it's a given, it's just saying, are you potentially interested? Okay. That's actually very consistent with what we've heard thus far. So that's reassuring. Again, it doesn't mean a trail's developed right there. And it doesn't mean that we're taking property, and it doesn't mean a lot of things. It just means we need to have a continued discussion. So how do you have that continued discussion? I keep reinforcing it because, well, it's important. Starts with a letter of interest. The county's website, and if you're a cell phone using fan or fanatic, pick up your phone, scan the image on the right hand side, and you can go right to the form. It'll take you right there, and you can actually submit an letter of interest right there. And I saw in one of the questions from somebody that was posted, if you're not interested, send an email to the county and say, I'm not interested as well. That sounds great. And we'd be happy to have that sort of feedback as well. That's actually really helpful too, so we know who's interested and who's not. But we do have this snazzy little feature here, so you can actually do that and submit it right there. And hopefully that gives you an opportunity to, at least for those 70-ish% of the people who just said yes, do that for me tonight, would you? All right, so there's the lakefront, right? And then there's how do you get to the lakefront? And I'm really interested because I don't own a lakefront property. I'm really interested in understanding how do I get there, and so is the rest of the public. And I'll tell you, Kelly Britt, who's with NOACA, actually knows a little bit about that because she's been doing TLCI studies for, well, a long time, I imagine, and a lot of them. And so what's really important is that this is a partnership that explores what can happen along lakefront. And with NOACA's help, we're looking at how do we connect back into the lakefront. And so with excitement, I guess I can say that they're moving forward with their TLCI piece of the project that connects us back to lakefront. So Kelly, I'm just going to give you a minute to just talk about your work too, and just kind of kick off your work.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Britt. I'm the project manager for the Regional Lakefront Connection Studies. We will be officially kicking this off in a couple of weeks to the public. But we wanted to take this opportunity to jump on this meeting here just to let you know that it's coming. So we decided that, as Jason was talking about, we had a lot of TLCIs come in about wanting to figure out how to better access the lake. So we figured that being a regional agency, we should look at this region-wide. And so this is what we're decided to do. So the purpose of this project is to create a regional vision for lakefront access and connections, improve access to the lakefront for all residents and visitors in the 5-county NOACA region, and strengthen multimodal transportation connections to and from the lakefront. So a lot of what Jason was talking about earlier today about finding out what the access points are, particularly for Cuyahoga County and the other 4 counties that we represent, and how do we better get people to the lake through transportation means, multimodal means, and that. So that's the kind of things we're going to be studying. Next slide, please. So the project schedule is starting, like I said, in a couple of weeks into fall. We're going to be reviewing previous plans, this one included. We know a couple other counties have some sorts of lakefront plans, so we'll be looking at those. We'll be collecting the existing conditions from those plans, as well as other counties that don't have plans. And then we'll conduct the actual analysis of the transportation access and try to figure out how to better move people and goods and bikes and scooters and everything else better to the lake. Then the winter, kind of spring of 2022, we'll start coming out to you as the public. We'll be having countywide meetings in each county where we'll test these ideas that we got from the existing conditions and kind of see, where the community is with them. And then if we, really get some good feedback, and then we'll start doing maybe a test area with our street supplies program. If you all are familiar with our street supplies program, please look it up on our website. A lot of people that have applied for TLCIs have used our street supplies program, and it's kind of to help communities figure out if you really want, speed bumps here, you can put some temporary ones down and see if that really works for your area. And then from there, the summer and fall, so approximately a year from now, we'll be looking at developing alternatives for all the modes and access, finalize a regional plan, and then develop an implementation plan. And that will then, after that, we'll come back out to the community with that plan and see how that goes over, and if there's anything we need to change or adjust. And then from there, we'll have these plans available, and hopefully we'll incorporate what you said, what you told Cuyahoga County you wanted, and we can move from there. So I believe that's the end of my slide. So I'm not sure who's Jason. If I kick it back to you.
Yeah, you can kick back to me, Kelly. Thanks so much.
Okay.
No,
No
it's
problem.
great. Appreciate it. So what we're doing tonight is informing that process, and we've been talking with NOACA for quite some time about this. And so we have a survey that we're going to be taking that data and helping jumpstart their process, because it's really important that we understand how to connect to the lakefront improvements. And so, Jake, why don't you run through the next series of slides, if you would?
Absolutely. Yeah, so you've heard a lot from us tonight. Now it's time that we hear from you. So we set up a survey to collect feedback and responses from you. And this is the tool that we will be using to collect public input. So it's really important that we disseminate this to as many people as possible, not only the people on the call tonight, but if you could share this with your friends, families, colleagues, anyone in the county that may be interested in the project. We're really interested in collecting as much feedback as possible. So in the pink box there, you see a link to a survey. This survey is composed of two different parts. The first part is a pretty standard question and answer portion where we'll ask you a few questions, asking you to identify where you live and your zip code, and a few required questions up front. And then we'll quickly go into a series of questions broken down by community. So starting in Bay Village from the west all the way to Euclid in the east, you'll find a series of questions underneath each tab that will ask you to assess the north-south connections for gaining access to the lake. How beneficial are these different segments? So as you go through the Bay Village example here, we'll have several different routes for you to evaluate, from the Cahoon and Huntington Lakefront trails to Cahoon and Dover Center, etc. So we'll ask you to evaluate those in terms of benefit, and then we'll also ask you to provide more input on why you evaluated it how you did. So there'll be an open response that will follow each of these, which will be optional. Feel free to answer as many questions pertinent to your community or the communities in which you visit and you're knowledgeable about. The second part of the survey is an optional portion of the survey, and it's probably unlike a survey that you've taken before, in that it's pretty interactive. So we've hosted a couple maps online embedded in the survey that'll ask you to identify a couple different things. The first one will be identify and map the barriers to mobility and access to the lake. So this will include anything from challenging wayfinding, unsafe crossings, busy streets, or just general poor infrastructure for biking and walking. You'll do this, there will be instructions on the website underneath each map, and it's a pretty simple process, really. There's only 4 steps from beginning to end. So you'll see exactly what you see on screen when you enter in the survey, the map that's kind of grayed out. and you'll click on the little green plus sign, and that means edit. So that'll pop open a little edit window. And inside that edit window, you'll see a red arrow that'll say new feature for unsafe crossings. So all you do is click that feature and then zoom around. You can pan, zoom in, zoom out on the map. If you zoom in to a pretty close, you'll pop open a high resolution aerial. So you should be able to locate these with as much precision as you think is necessary. Once you've clicked on the map, it'll locate the feature, and a little dialog box will pop up asking you to describe that, asking for a description. That's optional, you don't have to do that. And then if you have a photo, let's say you were out at the intersection and you took a photo of something in particular, feel free to upload that file into the database. You'll probably be doing this on a computer, so you might have to do, if it's on your phone, you might have to email it to yourself and upload or get it to your computer somehow. But the next mapping exercise will take place on another mapping application directly underneath the first. So you'll keep scrolling, and this one will show. And editing this one, this one is asking you to draw your most preferred routes for accessing the lake. So in the Q&A portion, we asked you to evaluate a set of predefined routes. This one, feel free to draw your own. There's a few buttons on this map that will assist you in drawing these routes. So in the top left corner, that's kind of underneath the edit window, you can see there's a plus sign, a minus sign, a home sign, and then what looks like a little bullseye. Actually, that bullseye will be really important because that will take you to exactly where you are. It'll ask permission to use your location, but click on that and you will go right to your house or wherever you're filling out the survey. From there, likewise, the same as the first go around, as you click on the green plus sign, and it'll pop open the edit dialog box. And this time, instead of seeing a red arrow, you'll see a blue line, and that blue line will be your route. So if you click on the map, you'll click a series of points to draw a line, and then double click to finish your segment. And as soon as you double click, it'll pop open that same dialog box with a description and a photo if you feel like you want to add that information. There's no need to hit save. All you do is close out of this window and it'll automatically be recorded. And that's the extent of the public survey.
Well, thanks, Jake. What I guess is that sounds really complicated. It's actually pretty intuitive when you go in there, and we've had success with this before. And you can fill out as much or as little as you want. But I think what we're really trying to do is give NOACA a head start on understanding how your perspectives influence and inform the connections that go to the lake. And so I think we've seen a couple questions about how the survey. This is where the survey can be gotten, or where you can access the survey. We'll actually post that up on the county website, and we'll post this presentation the next day or two. So you'll have access to it there, so you can get that pretty easily from that point. So we'll make sure that that's there. Again, if you're a landowner, you want to fill out a letter of interest, scan that thing, and then just stay tuned, because there's a lot going on and a lot of updates that will occur over time on the county's website. So what's next for the county plan? Kind of what Kelly talked about for NOACA. This is where we're headed. We talked about, we're going to stick this recording up. We're going to put the web application, which defines where those segments are prioritized, so you can see what the rating is for your segment of Shoreline. That should be a web application that's up pretty shortly. We have it ready. We'll be developing the actual document that is the describes in words what we talked about tonight. That's being posted in the next 30, 60 days, somewhere in that range. And then advancing the plan, there's a lot of things that need to happen, like continued discussions. If there's 70% or 60% of the folks that are here tonight, there's gonna be a lot more discussion. That's great. That's exactly what we're looking for. And then we want to identify areas to invest in potentially, and talk about those focus areas and explore those focus areas. We want to continue to find additional dollars, as Mike and Jim spoke about, and then we want to build some things, because everybody believes something that's built. It can happen. And so I think it's really important that we move forward with those. So with that, we're going to just move into questions. We see some that you've posted already. If you have more questions, you can post them or you can send a message over to the county. You can also send a message through here if you're not particularly interested in a public-private partnership as a landowner. Feel free to use that as your vehicle. And so with that, I'm gonna just open it up to questions. As Jake's talked about, we're using the Q&A function. Send it to all panelists if you can. Looks like we got 12 questions thus far. Jake, do you want to start with any questions that are common, or I guess anybody at the county have anything that they'd like to reiterate that we didn't hit on before we open it up?
I would just like to add, I know we've said it in other meetings, but this is really about a partnership. And so Jason, you made the point that, if we don't have the property owner's interest, then it's not something we're going to pursue. But it really is a partnership. And again, it's accessing public dollars that as private owners, you are not able to do to stabilize that shoreline. And just to reemphasize that this is not really paths going through people's backyard. This is down at the lake level. And so, part of this project has really been about the education. And so we want to just make sure anyone that that is, not sure what's going on and wants more information, please do reach out to us. We're happy to provide additional information. There is additional recordings from the first public meeting on our website, and we've met with several property owner groups or homeowners associations. So happy to continue doing that, because it really is a partnership as part of this project. So it's not about taking anyone's property. So just wanted to reemphasize that again, so we didn't lose sight of that.
You can't really say that too much, Mary.
No.
So Jake, there's some common questions that we can roll through.
Yeah, I think it might just be important to reiterate, if people are interested, what do they do? If people aren't interested, what do they do?
Okay, so if you're not interested, I'm going to tell you, this is your best vehicle. Just go to the website, county planning, put your name, email address. Instead of question, just say, I'm not interested in partnering. We get the idea. That's great. If you are
interested, provide
interested,
your address. That would be helpful.
Very good point, Mary. That's a good catch there. So if you are a landowner, we're going to ask you just to go. I'm going back to this on the website as well. You can fill out a letter of interest. You can create fill this out, and you can download a letter of interest as well, and you can get to that by scanning this if you're so inclined. Jake, what else I got?
I've got a question asking about a few specifics of the design of what this may look like.
Yeah.
Can you just describe a few of the factors that help influence, I guess, sort of the structural component of this, such as like wave dynamics and seasonality and high water and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If you live along the lake, the power of it, and that we're seeing more situations where you have winter that may not have ice, and those big northeast waves and winds blow, and that creates some interesting situations. And so I think the factors there's a variety of factors, everything from the geology of the bluff to the depth of the lake bed to the direction of wind and wave, and the relative to your shoreline, how much sand is moving along your shoreline. I think those are a lot of the key factors when we're starting to look at how high does this have to be, how big does the stone need to be, or the structure that's the battering ram against these forces. Those are all things that you need to work through. Does that make sense, Jake?
Yeah. Yeah, so that definitely influences cost, right? So we don't have a defined length necessarily right now, so it's hard to sort of assign an overall cost to the project. But can you speak a little bit about the cost of the project?
More structure equals more dollars, and more complicated sites equal more dollars. So if I'm looking at the cost differential between doing something over in Beulah Park, I think Jim, you spoke about, we have a $5.8 million rough budget for that project. The same stretch along the west side, because of the bluff and the conditions there, might be 1.5 to 2 times the cost, just because of the dynamics over there. So in general, if you look at the Euclid project, it was about 3/4 of a mile of shoreline, about $13.5 million, which included a variety of different improvements. So when you start looking at that, you can see it's not cheap, right? And it is significant, but generally, I think, east side is cheaper than west side in general, just because of the complexity of the bluff is a little bit different. But those are all factors once we start getting into more detailed discussions with and geotechnical investigations to understand the stabilities of those bluffs. We'll have a better idea of how much investment needs to occur to protect those bluffs fully.
Okay. Let's say a group of people are interested,
Yeah.
but they'd like to have more information. They'd like to talk with somebody on before signing a letter of interest.
Oh yeah.
Who would that
I
be, or
think,
how would they go about doing that?
well, my guess is that they'll talk to the people on this call, and more than likely that will be Jim and I potentially, but we'll see. At least that's been the history, and I think Mary and Mike have all been involved and those as well. And so the group who you're hearing from tonight is who you're going to end up talking with, and the best way to probably get a hold of is to go to the county's website, and submit just where that question functionality was that I was noting right here. Just send an email to county planning, or fill out your name and just let us know. We've had, as I said, probably 16 or so of those that are just, we want to understand more before we understand, to talk about what this letter of interest is and what does it really mean. So I think that's a good place to start, and that'd be my recommendation. Any
Okay.
thoughts, Jim?
Just had to unmute myself. Yeah, I agree. And also on the website, you can also find my direct email address as well.
Thanks, guys.
Jim's cell phone number? No, that's something different. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, let's say our homeowners association's already expressed interest and positive feedback, and they've already actually signed a letter. Do individual property owners have to sign?
The letter of interest, no. In future agreements, potentially. It depends upon the specific bylaws of the association. But for a letter of interest perspective, if you've already sent one in and you know that's been sent in, no, I think that's fine. We'll know that that's from the geography that's there. So I see no reason you couldn't if you really wanted to, though. So if you want to reinforce the point, then go right ahead. Or if you'd like to dissent from the group, then go ahead as well.
Okay. Let's say a property owner needs something done now. They need to stabilize the bluff because they're losing their land. And they go ahead and they do something. They intervene. And then this project comes on board in the future. Is there any potential to get reimbursed for work done now?
We've had this question come up a lot, and we've actually had this question come up in Euclid in a way. It's a little bit different, but the concern I have is that there has to be public benefit. So protecting your shoreline for protecting your shoreline's sake doesn't do any good. Like, that's not a reason that the county could invest public dollars in it, right? To gain public access as a benefit to the community justifies the investment of federal and state dollars. And so if it's built the appropriate way with the appropriate considerations, there's maybe opportunities to discuss that. We'd want to have some further dialogue about that for sure. But I think, just understand the context of this is it's not out of the goodness of our hearts, right? I mean, we're actually trying to do something for public good. So there's got to be a commensurate value there. So I think in general, I would say that there's potential, but if it's not done the right way and not built to standards that are actually designed to withstand things and that actually have some merit to how they were built versus a contractor just dumping stone, there's a lot of different factors. So hard to say. I think a discussion that, if you're in that situation, which I know a number of folks are, just send a message here and let's have a dialogue about it, because it's pretty complicated to answer all things under the sun on that one.
Let's
Any
see, let
other
me take a
big
browse through the
questions, okay?
questions here. Yeah, we're getting a couple here. What do you
Perfect.
see as a role for Lakefront SIDs to assess shoreline improvements over the long term and support a portion of the project cost?
Ooh, that's a really good one. I think here's a couple thoughts, and then I'm going to ask others to throw out some thoughts as well. So one of the things that I've been asked is a little bit different version of that. Is a special improvement district a positive? The answer is yes. Does it necessarily align with this? I mean, special improvement district is really intended for individual landowners to be able to address things. And what we're looking at is knowing that individually addressing things isn't necessarily the winning strategy, right? It doesn't accomplish a variety of different goals in terms of public access and habitat and all these other things. So the special improvement district can be a vehicle potentially, but I'd say that this is a little bit different than that. And I think there are areas and segments along the shoreline where there probably is less priority for county to invest in, or interest in terms of county investing in that region. That's probably where I see the special improvement districts being particularly useful. I don't know if anybody at the county has a different perspective or can add to that.
Yeah, I would
No,
just add,
Go
oh,
ahead,
sorry,
Mary.
go ahead, Mike, go ahead.
I would tend to agree with you, Jason. That's probably a good way to summarize. It really needs to be for the overall public benefit, and that was the intent of pushing forward this initiative. There's been many improvements along the lakefront, but it really needs to enhance the entire county and provide that type of access that we're hoping to accomplish here. So there may be an opportunity there, but I think we need to probably talk about it a little bit further and see if there is some type of partnership between maybe a public access point and a SID, but we'd have to look at it. So I appreciate it, and I'd be willing to get into the dialogue.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, it's a question that's come up in several conversations that we've had so far in the project. And so we are, we're thinking about putting together some kind of a resource section on our page about SIDs and how they work, and then continue, as Mike said, just the dialogue with those that are interested. So we've had some conversations, and a lot of, it's been done other places, and Euclid is a good model, which Jason or Jim can probably speak to that. But as part of this process, it's something we're just going to try and provide information and resources to people.
That's great, guys. One thing I want to just hit on is that, so this association actually had a platform that was the same square footage roughly at the lake level. And what they ended up doing was, as part of the improvement to cost to build the public infrastructure, the city actually built this new pad because it was necessary to allow for the public trail. And so this instance, we have a situation where an existing improvement was actually replaced because it was necessary to construct the public improvement. Next door, they did not have access, and that association didn't actually have a platform or anything like that. They actually went through and did a special improvement district along that street that actually funded a new platform and a new walkway down to the lakefront. That was not funded as part of the municipality Euclid's project cost because it didn't exist. But where there are existing improvements, there's potential to work with those. And so it kind of relates to that last question. Any other things that you can see there, Jake, that people have been kind of commonly
Yeah.
posting?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of people from Cleveland on the call, so curious about what's going on with the Burke Airport.
uh, See these hands? I'm not touching that one. Uh, so I guess I think it's well, I'll go with an initial reaction, which is there's a lot that could go on, and Meigs Field, if you're familiar with that in downtown Chicago, Northern Ireland is essentially the parallel to that. But I think that's a long ways off in talking with just a variety of different folks. I don't know, county folks, do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Burke Lakefront Airport is only a small percentage of the overall lakefront. So we're talking 32 miles. It's a relatively small piece of it. It's an important piece in the middle of downtown. The administration has been firm about it's not a discussion point at this time. We are advancing the project along the marginal there, which is an important between 9th and East 55th Street. So we've got that project moving along. We've got some conceptual drawings pulled together for that of what can happen there. That's a great connection between the Cheers project just off of 55th Street, and then also what the Browns are proposing in the land bridge that may be coming over from the malls A, B, and C there. So this is a great linkage that we could probably get started like within the next 2 years here. And that's the key here is we're trying to advance projects that we're going to see in our lifetime and see them fairly quickly. So our hope is that we can get these low hanging fruit projects and move them along. The Beulah Park project, great example. I think we're going to be able to see some action on that before the end of next year, and really excited about that project. So we'll continue to chase those dollars and hopefully be able to attract them here to Cuyahoga County.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have a couple more questions here. I'm gonna jump back to Euclid. So,
Perfect.
what were some of the unexpected issues that came up during the work in Euclid as either a surprise to the homeowner or to the county?
Well, the city did that, but surprised the contractor was that the water level stayed up where it did. The surprise to me was that they were able to construct through the entire winter. They moved big chunks of ice. That was impressive. Surprise to the landowners, I think, was that it's actually been less concerning to them than I think they thought in some ways. If I had to be brutally honest, the one challenge that we have is there's a sidewalk piece that we've had to replace a couple times because it didn't go in exactly like it was supposed to replace what existed. So that's probably been the biggest problem, has been just making sure that we get everybody happy on an agreement that was just a small little connection, but nothing, to be honest with you, that was really too crazy. I mean, the contractors were pre-qualified and able to do this type of work, and we kind of anticipated most things. So just the complexity of working along the waterfront is always interesting, and then the amount of unpermitted fill and the issues we had to deal with for dredging and removing that material was somewhat surprising, but somewhat anticipated too. So
Thanks, Jason.
no.
It's 6:30. I don't know. Do we want to take a couple more questions, or do we want to collect the remaining questions and post them online under a frequently asked questions tab?
Are they simple ones or not?
Yeah. I mean, we can probably hit a couple of these if we'd like.
Yeah, hit them quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's 7:30 in Ohio.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It is 7:30 in Ohio. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I'll tell you. We'll take two.
Okay. We'll do them in order here, and a couple of them we won't get to. I apologize. We were talking about Euclid here. So
Yep.
in the example there, that you had up, what prevents the neighborhood streets from becoming parking nightmares for the residents and people wanting to access the lakefront trail?
That was probably one of the concerns that most people would have. People aren't really driving to this. It's really a foot traffic type of thing. I think where I've seen, and you can go over to Sims Park and you can see the parking next to Hen Mansion. I was just there for an event maybe a month ago. I probably saw, I don't know, 12 vehicles, if that, or 10 vehicles, if that, in that parking lot. So generally, we haven't seen that to be the means people are getting there. It's part of their daily routine, rather than something they're seeking out and driving to. That at least has been our experience. Plus, like for example, Euclid Beach has a tremendous amount of parking in it. So we haven't really run into that being a huge issue. Some of it's signage and some of it's just awareness on that. But in Euclid, it hasn't really been a problem.
Okay. So for the homeowners in Euclid there, were there any ongoing responsibilities after it was constructed?
The ongoing responsibilities included stuff like don't throw your grass clippings over the edge so that you destroy the native landscaping that is critical to the bluff stability. Things like that. Nothing. The maintenance of it is really, there's an easement to the top of the bluff that the city takes and manages, and so not really a whole lot. It's if you have a private improvement, it's yours to maintain, and don't throw stuff that shouldn't be there onto the bluff face.
Okay. More?
Yeah,
I've got them. Okay.
Yeah, I think we can do anything that we didn't answer. We'll add to an FAQ and post it on the website. So if we didn't answer your question, we're sorry about that, but we'll provide answers to frequently asked questions on the website.
Yep. And I think that's a great place to stop. There's a lot of questions about permittability and the Army Corps and Ohio Department of Natural Resources and things that we've all had to deal with as part of these projects. But with that, I guess I'll leave those questions. We can answer them, like I said, online. And like Jim and Mary said, we'll post those. If you do have the opportunity, you'll find these locations or these things posted there as well. The survey, please do take time and share that with other folks. That's critical to NOACA's work. And if you're a landowner interested or not, send a message or get in touch with the county one way or the other. With that, I guess, are there any closing thoughts for county folks that they'd like to end on?
Well, I would just say thank you very much on behalf of County Executive Armin Budish. Really appreciate the feedback we're going to get here tonight. Looking forward to trying to advance these projects. Please, if you have any interest whatsoever in pursuing this, drop us a line. Jim Sonhalter is our project manager on this. Give him a call or go on the website there and submit your question. You could contact me down at the county headquarters also. We'd like to hear from you. Like I said, we're looking to try and advance these projects if we can. And feedback from you it would be so valuable. So once again, thanks, and I appreciate it. Mary?
Oh, thank you. Yep. Again, I know you're all busy in your evenings, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us. We're going to try and keep everything. The recording of this meeting will also be available on our website. So if there's friends of yours or family members who weren't able to join us, please do share that and point people to the website, and we'll try and keep everything very current there. And again, the information you provide in the survey following this meeting is really going to help NOACA in their work in taking this project to the next level. So again, those north-south connections are just as important as the east-west connections along the lakefront. So thank you.